So I've been doing a lot of fasting in the last few years, and I recently did a 5-day water fast, the longest I've ever done to date. In mid-2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, I started with a pretty intense intermittent fasting regimen. I was already fasting 16 hours a day, and had been doing it for years, but in 2020, I started doing OMAD, 1 meal a day on weekdays, and at least 16-hour fasts on weekends. I eventually started doing a 27 or 28-hour fast once a week without much of a problem, but after learning about Peter Attia's fasting regimen, I wanted to take fasting to the next level. Peter Attia used to fast for 7 days every 3 months, but apparently got tired of that and instead started doing a 3-day water fast once a month. According to his blood markers, it's after the second day when the benefits of the fast probably start. So 3-day fasts are probably beneficial, especially if you're doing them that frequently, and that's what I sort of started to do. I don't do a 3-day water fast every month, but I try to do one every month and a half or two. The first one I ever did was on November 2022, and after the first 48 hours I told myself I was never doing it again. But in 2023, I did 8 prolonged fasts, 7 of 3 days, and 1 of 4 days. So far in 2024, I've done 4 3-day water fasts, and 1 5-day fast with water and electrolytes. I became obsessed with fasting after reading 2 books, The Fasting Cure by Upton Sinclair and My Battle Against Cancer by Tenenbaum. From what Upton Sinclair says about fasting in The Fasting Cure, prolonged fasting is miraculous and the most effective panacea. The book talks about people who successfully cured themselves of headaches, insomnia, colds and fevers, rheumatism, anemia, eczema, appendicitis, and sciatica. And he even mentions a girl whose spine was bent in the shape of a letter U lying sideways who managed to straighten it significantly by fasting. I don't know if I believe this, but it's written in the book. He also mentions one person who cured himself of cancer by fasting, which may also sound insane, but in the book My Battle Against Cancer, Tenenbaum explains that he did exactly that. With that said, this is not medical advice, and remember that cancer is a very complicated disease, so if you have cancer, this is not permission to ignore your doctor and dismiss conventional medicine and simply start fasting. But as I was saying, Tenenbaum was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer in 2018. His cancer had metastasized into the bones and lymph glands, and according to his doctor, it was incurable. But he wanted to fight for his life and tried to starve the cancer by fasting, so he fasted 25 days with very little water. For 21 days he ate very little. He then fasted 9 days, again with very little water, then 21 days with plenty of water, and then fasted without any water for 4 days. And thankfully, it all worked for him because he's still alive today, cancer-free, and he didn't require chemotherapy. He has been fasting regularly for anywhere between 3 and 10 days since 2020 and recommends the following fasting protocol for anyone with cancer: OMAD daily, a 48-hour fast each week, a 72-hour fast each month, and a 7-day fast every other month. But as I said, this is not medical advice, so don't try this at home, and remember that cancer becomes a very complicated disease once it has metastasized. So if you have cancer, always consult your doctor. But chemotherapy and immunotherapy are probably the best cancer treatments currently available. However, studies show that doing a prolonged fast or following a fasting mimicking diet for a few days just before chemotherapy could improve the treatment's effectiveness. This may sound counterintuitive, but fasting doesn't weaken cancer patients in any way. On the contrary, in a fasted state, cancer cells become more vulnerable to the chemotherapy, while perfectly normal cells become more resistant to it. So one could consider arriving to a chemotherapy session on a fast. 3 days are probably enough, but of course, as I keep saying, one should consult their doctor beforehand. So what happens to your body after days of not eating? Well, a lot of things. Ketones rise while glucose drops and insulin pretty much plummets, all of which is good. But the reason I have been fasting is because I want my body to enter a state of autophagy. In a state of autophagy, cells divide more slowly or stop completely and the body begins to recycle damaged proteins, a process that can extend life. At the very least, it has done so in many different organisms, rodents, fruit flies, etc. In fact, rapamycin, an immunosuppressant drug that works by inhibiting mTOR, has successfully extended the life of different organisms as well, and can activate autophagy without having to fast or restrict calories when taken intermittently. But I'm not going to get into that right now. Thankfully, I don't suffer from a serious health condition that I urgently need to cure, but I want to think that by doing a prolonged fast every now and then, following a healthy diet, exercising, and working on my emotional health, I can prevent that from happening. With that said, I was dealing with a minor health condition that I wanted to fix, sciatica. Don't get me wrong, sciatica can be very serious, but my case wasn't that bad, hence the reason why I'm calling it a minor health condition. But it was there, it was annoying, and I wanted to fix it. Now, I understand it sounds strange to think that a prolonged fast could help with something like this, but I'll remind you that in the fasting cure, Upton Sinclair does mention that one man treated his sciatica by fasting, and I wanted to put it to the test. Now, a 3-day fast is probably enough to reach autophagy for most metabolically healthy people, but in the book, Sinclair does mention that the people who didn't get much benefit from fasting only fasted 3 or 4 days, implying that that might not be enough, and that's why I went for a slightly longer fast of 5 days instead, at least one of the reasons. So did it work? Not really, so who knows, perhaps it only works for some people. Maybe I need to do more prolonged fasts, maybe I need to do them without electrolytes, or maybe fasting is not the panacea that Sinclair says it is. I don't know. The point is, the information in this book didn't help me with that specific problem. I'm hoping this one will. Having said that, I think fasting has helped me with something else. Migraines. I used to get 2 or 3 migraines a year, but since I started doing prolonged fasting, I haven't had a single one. Anyways, what happened to me during the 5 days, and how did I prepare for the fast? Well, I followed a ketogenic diet for a week prior to the fast. You might have heard that on a prolonged fast, people report feeling hungry only during the first few days. After 2 or 3 days, people say that their hunger eases, and the reason that is because you enter a state of ketosis, meaning that your body starts to use ketones as its primary fuel instead of glucose. I did keto prior to the fast in order to enter ketosis beforehand and not feel that hungry at any point during the fast. This works pretty well for me. As I said, I've done prolonged fast before, and if I do keto for a few days before the fast, it's a much easier fast. This was my last meal. I had a sockeye salmon fillet, a coho salmon fillet, 5 pasture-raised eggs, olive oil, some oysters, a few blackberries and raspberries, and a keto coconut chocolate mousse sweetened with allulose and a bit of Lakanto maple syrup. And after this meal, my weight was 68.7 kilograms, my glucose was at 85 milligrams per deciliter, and my ketones were at 1.1 millimolars per liter. Throughout the fast, I took it easy. I didn't do much exercise, although I did walk for about 2 hours every day. And these walks helped a lot because they kept me distracted, although they were somewhat challenging. Not super challenging, but as you can imagine, long walks with food inside of you is much easier than walking on an empty stomach. Throughout the days, my weight obviously kept going down, and my glucose dropped while my ketones went up, but they both stabilized after a few days. I measured these every 24 hours. These are the results. I actually did a 3-day fast in June, and I also measured my glucose, ketones, and my weight throughout the fast. And I actually lost more weight after a 3-day water fast than I did after a 5-day water fast with electrolytes. My guess is that I lost more calories on the 5-day fast, but lost less weight because the sodium caused me to retain a bunch of fluid. On both fasts, my glucose went down significantly and reached a low of 54 milligrams per deciliter, which is not healthy according to many people, but with high levels of ketones, and they went pretty high, I was clearly switching fuels from glucose to ketones. Plus, I felt fine for the most part, so I didn't worry too much about my glucose dropping as much as it did. As you can see, my ketones went pretty high, and by the 48-hour mark, my ketone levels surpassed my glucose levels on both fasts. In Joe Rogan's podcast number 994, Dominic D'Agostino tells Joe that when ketone levels are higher than glucose levels, this is called the metabolic zone, and this puts tremendous metabolic stress on cancer cells or precancer cells that have a huge appetite for glucose, and this can initiate autophagy according to his research. Also, as I mentioned earlier, ketones help with hunger, so you shouldn't be that hungry with high levels of ketones, but I have to admit that that wasn't exactly the case with me. I began to feel hungry-ish after the first 48 hours. I'm willing to bet it would have been worse had I not done keto prior to the fast, because I've actually done that experiment before. But I think I was hungry. My dad actually asked me if I was hungry on the 4th day of the fast, and my response was, I don't know, so take that as you will. However, if anything made this 5-day fast easier, it'd have to be the electrolytes I was taking. I used Element raw and flavored electrolytes which contain 1000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium per packet, and 0 calories. I started taking 3 or 4 of these a day starting on the 2nd day of the fast. All the prolonged fasts I did prior to this one I did with nothing but water. I didn't even drink black coffee or tea, and the difference in how I felt with electrolytes is unbelievable. It's so much easier, and I don't think they break a fast. As I said, these have no calories, and even Peter Attia has said that when he fasts for longer than 3 days, he takes bouillon, which provides him with sodium and potassium without having to consume calories, and on top of that, he takes a magnesium supplement, which is a great idea considering that magnesium gets depleted fairly quickly on a fast, and most people are already deficient in magnesium. Also, fasting for long periods of time without electrolytes can apparently cause heart issues, so that's something else to keep in mind. But as a side note, electrolytes give you energy, so instead of lying down on the bed or couch waiting for the fast to end without energy to do much, you can actually take long walks like I did, or even lift weights if you want. I know some people do, and by doing either of these, you can burn even more calories during your fast. If you're wondering about the quality of my sleep during the fast, I'll just briefly say that the first 2 nights were great. I slept like a baby, but the following nights, I actually barely slept at all, and this made the fast much harder. Not only was I quote-unquote hungry, but also fatigued, a very unpleasant combination, as one might expect. But I plowed through the pain. I eventually want to get an Oura ring to measure the quality of my sleep, but I don't have one for the time being, so that's pretty much what I can say about my sleep for now. Finally, how do I break a 3-day or 5-day fast? Most of the 3-day fast that I've done, I have broken with a mashed avocado, and this is because it's a soft food that is easy on the gut, and it's also a fat-rich food. In the 4-Hour Body, Tim Ferriss recommends starting every meal with fat to avoid blood glucose spikes. He says that the more fat and the earlier in the meal, the less the glycemic response. For these reasons, an avocado seemed to be the perfect food to break a fast with, but I always ended up with nausea and gastrointestinal discomfort for pretty much the entire day when I broke a fast with an avocado, so I tried something different. After reading Glucose Revolution by Jessie and Inchauspe, I started breaking my fasts with fiber, followed by protein and fat, and I would wait about half an hour before starting to eat starch and sugar, something you will most likely crave after a prolonged fast. According to her, eating in this order helps prevent glucose spikes from rising that much, but after a prolonged fast, in my case at least, my glucose goes up significantly, even if I break the fast the way she recommends. After my last 3-day fast and my 5-day fast, my glucose went as high as 119 milligrams per deciliter a few hours after eating starch and sugars. However, I didn't experience any nausea or GI discomfort during the day. I actually felt great for the entire day, after both fasts. So that's how I break a prolonged fast now, and how I start every meal now with the hopes of keeping my blood glucose levels on the low side. Now, I want to comment on my mood the day I break a prolonged fast. I actually feel ecstatic and blissful, and also very calm, and this has happened to me after pretty much every prolonged fast I've ever done. It unfortunately only lasts a day, and at first I thought this was none other than my ego telling me how awesome I was for having the discipline to do something like this, but I actually think it goes much deeper than that. Elevated ketones, a healthy gut microbiome, and healthy mitochondria may all contribute to my mental well-being after a fast. This is just an educated guess. I don't know for a fact if this is what's truly going on, but according to the book Brain Energy by Dr. Christopher Palmer, this could very well be what's going on. If you've done prolonged fasts before, or keto perhaps, let me know if you've experienced this. I would love to know. Let me talk about fasting and cancer a little bit more. As I already said, it's probably not a smart idea for a person with cancer to ignore conventional medicine altogether and simply start fasting. But for those who don't have cancer, prolonged fasting or even intermittent fasting could potentially help prevent it. Take this with a grain of salt, as this contradicts what Peter Attia says about cancer prevention in his book Outlive. He says that of all the age-related diseases, it's the hardest to prevent, and there is currently pretty much nothing one can do to lower one's risk of getting cancer down to zero. So I don't want to spread misinformation, but hear me out. It is a well-known fact that cancer is more prevalent among smokers than among non-smokers, but not every smoker gets cancer, and not every non-smoker doesn't get cancer. If Guy Tenenbaum, a man with advanced metastasized cancer, was able to cure himself with fasting, doesn't it make sense to think that intermittent and prolonged fasting could help prevent cancer to some extent? Well, in the Middle East, cancer rates are significantly lower than in other parts of the world, and some believe this is because these people do intermittent fasting for a month every year. This month of intermittent fasting is none other than Ramadan, and during this holiday, Muslims don't have anything to eat or drink during the daytime, and as I just said, their cancer rates are significantly lower than those of the United States and other parts of the world. Unfortunately, their cancer rates are not zero, but the fact that they are lower suggests that fasting could be a preventative measure, at least to some extent. Or maybe it's because in the Muslim countries people consume little to no alcohol, which is a carcinogen, but I digress. Ramadan probably contributes to their health and lower cancer rates to a significant extent. In short, my hypothesis is that if more people did intermittent fasting in the US and other countries, cancer rates would significantly decline. Obviously, in the US, a bigger problem than people not fasting is the standard American diet, so simply improving that could help lower not only the risk of cancer, but of heart disease, diabetes, and other diseases. But I do hope scientists keep studying fasting in relation to cancer, and I hope my hypothesis is correct, simply because I fast a lot, and I want to think I don't do it for nothing. As always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.